Hello everyone, I'm Drifting, and today I'm going to be talking about a Korean Academy web novel. Now, I previously said I was going to do something along the lines of Supporters Ate It All. Um, it's already been covered by Novel Fantasy and Butterfly Valley. Those are their tags on YouTube. Um, so I'm not as inclined to do it. I mean, it's all in Korean, so like the probability of you guys being able to like understand it is like very low since I'm like doing it in English. So it's still worth it to do it, but I want to do something that no one's covered yet, and then I can always go back, right? Leaving like you can always go back to like the big titles. Although it only gets harder as memory passes on, and the niche stuff like kind of disappears. But anyway, so the Korean web novel that we're going to cover today is 30 Years Have Passed Since the Prologue. Now, there's so many things I want to recommend and like go into. It's not quite like Bleak Walker. It's closer to something like Rewrite or Epilogue. So we go into that genre. I really just want to geek out and nerd into it. But let me like set up the premise, the summary, the author before we really geek out into the genre. So the author, to the best of my Google Translate Google Fu abilities, is Makelaha. As I said, I don't speak Korean, so apologies for pronunciation, which just roughly translates to wow. This is a novel on Novelpia, so one of the big platforms. Novelpia, Munpia, obviously, Naver, Kakao, those sites. And then it's contracted by studios such as JHS, U Books, KW Books, D&C Comics, Golem Factory, whatever logo brands that you see or have previously talked about. KW Golem Factory. There's a couple like J Plus, which is I think affiliated with Yen Press, which is Soyetsu and Kadokawa. But yeah, so Makalaha, sorry, do Chinese pronunciation, publishes on Novelpia. This is his only web novel that I'm aware of, so it's really niche. It actually kind of makes sense as you read into it. It definitely has a newbie writer style, which is surprising. There's so many things I want to cover. Let's go over the summary real quick before I really dive deep into the tags and the reason why I say this is very interesting. So the summary or the description is, I got transmigrated into a game I've never seen before. I thought it was a top-notch RPG and spent 30 years on it. I retired as a war hero and plan to spend my remaining time leisurely. But it turns out it was an academy story. So yeah, it's very interesting. The current cover is this old man pointing a gun, and then like it's very much similar to Trigun, Vash Stampede. So we have an elderly protagonist along the lines of like I retired from the S rank adventurers party. National Master does not practice. I recorded an audio recording. We'll see if I get the video out. Wuxi is really hard. But then you have the novel Pia covers. Before we get into it, I'm going to go on a quick tangent. Novelpia is very interesting because their site has a lot of covers that I don't want to put it out there, but I will put it out there. It just looks like AI covers, which I think is very interesting. They do a better generation than I would say web novel, and because it's just artistic, right? Because you have anime girls and whatnot. So I guess that's one style. Um, that was a very rapid implementation of anime. Like you think they'd use like Dan Boru, so you'd actually have like real artists, but it looks like it's very AI generated, or it has that AI generated style because it's all homogenous, or it's all just one similar style. Whereas web novel, they had like a generic style with like actual artists. They actually have like cover artists, just like you'd have YouTube thumbnail artists and whatnot. So I thought that was interesting. But yeah, 30 years have passed since the prologue. I was trying to understand why this felt so special. Like what made this different from like Rewrite, Epilogue, The Bleak Walker, like S Rank Adventure Retires. There's like a couple of even Chinese web novels where you had like the retired priest go back into service. And I will say there's a major turning point between chapter 22 and 23. The whole chapter of 22, that ending, if you read into it, actually does change a lot. But I will say this is very similar to Simulacrum. The villain wants to live, surviving the academy or the academy's extra, Demon Limited Hunter, right? Dorothy, Lucy, Ephraim. I like to say epinephrine because there's Elphine. There's like X's that's hard to pronounce. You have Dang Gal Yu from Supporter Eats It All, which is very similar to what's the protagonist in this one? let me figure this out really quickly. So Dang Gao Yu is like the demon or like the shadow instructor. In this one, we have a vampire. It's like what 70 to 120 years old. Um, and this one had a very interesting character. Oh, Enrique. Yeah, Enrique is like this vampire. We have like the saint. So you have the various tropes, right? Very similar to Simulacrum, where you have like the hero setup as you would in novels extra, the flashing genius. I'm covering this some from novels fantasies list, where you have a behind the scenes main character. The villain wants to live, like the Trash of the Count's Family, classic stuff. Um, novels extra, X rank, right? Because I recently covered that. So Enrique, you have Isabella, you have Ect, Ect, Ectasis, Elfine. You have a lot of protagonists. I like Elfine just because it's so close to Ephraim, and it's just very close to the one of the female leads or harem protagonists in The Villain Wants to Live. You'll see very similar harem styles in Real Life Player. And supporting role wants supporter eats it all. But what makes this unique is the main character. You have two routes for the academy. There's a couple routes, but there's two main ones. You have the student route, right, where you become a student and you're like a part of the novel. We've seen that in the novels extra, right? So we have level one, which is just a classic Academy Wuxia basic web novel. That's like the basic trope, right? Like, the MC. Then we have the novels extra. So that's N plus one, right? So one level above it, like one level up on the pagoda, which is like, the main characters have foresight or pre existing knowledge of the future, right? Or of the expected path. So it's not quite like precognition or like a prediction, but rather one future world line that they're able to change and influence. Then you have N plus two, which is the regressor's regressor, right? Like novels extra is extra, basically. Um, we're similar to that, right? So you obviously regressors have various tropes, and then you know the main character, so you're supporting the main character. This one's a little different. Um, because of the way it involves the world, I call this an open world scenario, right? Where you have in Simulacrum, we have a low level cliches, or you go through the basic cliches and you kind of subvert them. That's like the very trope level. Then you have the N plus one level, whereas you have a more meta web novel, right? So like Simulacrum is very similar to it takes a lot of these tropes and it just runs with it and it just like takes it to its absolute exaggeration and makes it interesting and unique for various scenarios. It still tells the plot and it follows those cliches, but it takes it in stride with the main character being aware of that, being aware of the fourth wall. So it's very meta and commentary, but it still adds story on top of it, right? And then you have this open world scenario where the writer will take the story to wherever he wants to go without being shackled to those tropes, right? Because when you read, you're aware of these tropes. So when you read a story like this, you don't have to be as self-aware because it's not as serious. It's not as like very plot conducive. Like you still have to tell a good story, but you're not as restricted to managing those expectations of cliches and the constantly ramping up because everything's so serious, right? So a story like this would have like the essence of Eminence in the Shadow, where it's like, oh, you're very behind the scenes. We see that a lot with the instructors. We see that a lot with supporter, aid it all, just these various novel extra where you have like these behind the scenes characters taking control, right? National master doesn't want to practice, noble mage behind the scenes. And then you have a lot of like skill based urban life fantasy, which would be like a Valiant Life and the Monk Who Wants to Renounce Ascetism. Spare Me Great Lord's a pretty classic urban life fantasy power up wuxia Murim style level up web novel or like Seized by the System. But yeah, this is very interesting because you have the student route and then you have the teacher route, right? You have the elderly protagonist, you have the mentor character, and how do you tell this story without making it super cliche? You have stories like Denpa Kyoshi, World Teacher, where it's like the teacher is like the main focus, right? Like assassin returns to the academy. We have plenty of those stories. A reincarnated assassin. They were a soldier in the army and they become a teacher, right? Or they have a secret identity and they have to protect the main protagonist. And we have plenty of those stories. You've seen a lot of those in the past, right? Back in 2012, 2016, even recently, but obviously it's become outdated. So we have to refresh it. So how do we do that? Well, the first 22 chapters I would consider setup. You introduce the characters, you introduce cliches, you will continue to introduce new characters and cliches and scenarios. We gain a cast of 5 main protagonists, but then we have this N+1 meta level plot. So there's A and B plot. I would call this the A and B plot, whereas the A plot is like you have the main character story, and the B plot where you have the supporting character story going on behind the scenes. Now, this requires a very careful crafting of writing because you need a good balance of both POVs, perspectives, because if there's too much B plot, like the behind the scenes setup, then the A plot doesn't advance and it's too slow. So it relies on reader patience to capture the imagination. It requires a lot of setup. It's very much like deductive reasoning in Sherlock Holmes, where information is being withheld or slightly um, revealed, and it is up to the writer to decide at what pace he decides to reveal the genius of the main character, as you would see with Evil Ad Organization or X Rank, where it's like, if the balance isn't done right, it feels a lot like filler chapters, and then there's some chapters that a lot of things happen because setup has to happen for events to happen. You can't just throw people into it. But if you run cliches into it like this, and you just run headfirst into them, and you just tell the scenarios, right, then it's less straightforward. One of the complaints with this particular web novel, 30 Years Have Passed Since the Prologue, is there's a lot of telling and not showing, where it's like it just completely explains the plot in a Sherlock Holmes deductive style. It reasons out these cliches just to make it very clear to the reader that we know the character in the story is aware of these cliches and is working around it. Because how else are you supposed to do that, right? So you kind of feel that reader's hand, but it's like as to better imprint yourself on the character or to substitute yourself for that character in that scenario. Um, what is the word called to relate to the main character, to make the main character more relatable. A lot of these tropes are exposed, and so the main character has to deal around it. He has this question of is he an NPC? Is he not an NPC? Now, chapter 22, spoilers abound. Like this is where I'm going to heavily get into the spoilers. He figures out that after 30 years, right, he's gone through this whole arc of the hero Maximilian, the hero's party, that you will slowly get revealed. It's kind of like Fearin, where the hero's party gets revealed in the past. His hidden past is slowly starting to be revealed. He is an orphanage director that then becomes a gardener. There's like the secret intelligence organization. We have some of this really light harem with like these older characters, a very dense protagonist, and then we have the younger harem characters, which just feel much more like children rather than like actual like harem protagonists, because these are the hero's children, like the hero party's children. He never had any children. He became an orphanage director and he did his own style. And you slowly introduce this cast of characters, of unique characters. The harem, I feel like, is too heavy. But you need a little bit of romance for these type of Korean web novels or just web novels in general. You need some sort of drama, otherwise it's very dry. It's very hard to do something without drama. Like Isaac was really good, but it had a central plot driving it. Like there was something heavy there. Spoiler for Isaac, it was all about managing the regressors and this otherworldly force. So there was a heavy, concentrated B plot. Because this author's a newer writer, he doesn't have such a strong B plot in mind to advance the A plot. Right, the overarching mystery. The overarching mystery, I think, is kind of weak. It's about the disappearing hero. I'm not going to get too much into spoilers there because that's up for you to read if you want to go through like the first 70 chapters. Is he dead? Like the past hero mysteries. What is this new mystery? But there is this overarching sense. I call this an open world story because this takes multiple regressors, right? And when you take multiple regressors, you have a fight, right? Like you have a fight of who is the main regressor, who's the weaker regressor, or do you do something like Reverend Insanity, where it's like a free for all, like or Raising Goo, where only one can survive. Now, at the beginning, we assume this is one world line, right? Where only one world line matters. But then here's where the gimmick blows itself out of the water, which is it goes from an N+1 level novel, so a meta level novel from a novel's extra, to a novel's extras extra to a meta commentary on novels extra. So like this is n plus 2, n plus 3, right? So n plus 1 is like one level above the previous one. So that's why it's n plus 2, n plus 3, different stage of the pagoda, whatever metaphor you want to use. Now, as I said, this is only going to appeal to those who enjoy like that power fantasy, the villain wants to live, the novel's extra, where you have foreknowledge and foresight. This one's a little bit less mature in writing style, but it makes up for it in ideas and direction. Now, there's a lot you have to work through. You have to work through the first 22 chapters of cliches. You pass that test, right? That's like the first barrier. You have to like deal with the harem. If you can accept that harem style and like you just enjoy it for what it is, right? Like from drawing upon your knowledge of previous ones, like the villain wants to live or the villain's extra, or you enjoy the genre, then you could kind of see the meta level. Otherwise, just reading this is, I think, by itself as a preliminary web novel into the genre is kind of boring. I would say you need some web novel experience and enjoy the genre enough to acknowledge the tropes and then realize what an interesting story this is, right? Because then once you have all these tropes, you have all these knowledge, like these, like, just like memes where you have to have prior knowledge to build upon, and you relate to these characters, right? Like you relate to Dorothy and Lucy in Surviving the Academy, Dorothy from Deem Limited Hunter. You relate to Ephraim from The Villain Wants to Live. Um, I keep thinking Ezekiel, but it's not Ezekiel. It's Enrique, to Dango Yule from Real Life, no, not Real Life Play, Supporter 8 at all, Real Life Player, Novels Extra. You read a lot of these characters, you start to see the familiar tropes pop up, and you start to see why it's so amusing. This is really an N plus 1 level web novel by, a newer author, so there's going to be a lot of those writing styles integrated, but that's what web novels are for, to explore the genre. We saw a lot with lit RPGs, and it's just very interesting to see a lot of this main hero story, these mystery. You go to No Game No Life with gods. You have various cult leaders. Like as I said, the the B plot pushes the A plot, right? The supporting cast pushes the main cast, but you don't really have the A plot is very obscured, right? Like where the story is going, no one really knows. There are various events that the main character has to deal with, and various minor philosophical events in the B plot that make it very engaging to read. That's why the first 22 chapters is a little bit difficult to read if you're not like prepared for it or set up for it. I really, I'm a speed reader, so I like rush through the first 22 chapters to get to like chapter. I still read like the whole chapter instead of like skipping chapters, but I just like read through it very quickly rather than say over word by word. And it was 823, I got like hit with a philosophical bomb of like, is he an NPC in this game world? Like, is he's always struggling with this question of, is he an NPC or is he a main character? And he's always seeing himself as a supporting cast. After chapter 22 to 23, he gains this revelation that this world is actually not set up just for one main character, but for a whole cast of main characters. There's all these questions of, why are there so many main character regressors coming to this world, right? He needs to accept that yes, he is a part of this world, and yes, he is a main character of his own story, just like all these characters are individuals of their own right. There's this really cool explanation for how the heroes arrive, how they disappear, returning to Earth, right? All these various tropes, and the regressors in and of themselves are fun. Whenever I talk about regressors, I think of Deus Ex Machina and One Punch Man, because Saitama is so overpowered. He's very much a Deus Ex Machina. He cannot be employed too often, otherwise the story dies, right? Like, because if Saitama's there all the time, none of the events gets pushed forward. The world of One Punch Man is super engaging because Saitama can only be there at certain moments, and he comes in at the most powerful moment, and then he keeps this hidden identity, and then you have all the sorts of drama going on behind the scenes. So for me, when I was in One Punch Man, because I was only looking for the B plot, right, which would be like the Black Organization and Detective Conan or Saitama in One Punch Man, you would be waiting 30, 40 chapters, right, to ever see that. Mob Psycho 100 does it better because the drama episodes are much more fulfilled. You don't have so much power over one main character, right? One Punch Man, I think, really tried to expand on the world of Saitama, and try not to focus too much on Saitama, but like obviously he is our main character. He's a gateway into the world, so it's really sad to not see the world from Saitama, or it's really boring when we don't see Saitama like reveal a secret identity. So there's that sort of tension there. But with 30 years have passed since the prologue, we our main character is both behind the scenes and the main character of his own story. And that's why the novel title is what it is, right? That's the fun part. It's like he's been in this prologue for 30 years. For a lot of web novels, right, it's like you set up, right? Like Legendary Mechanic, you set up before the game world. Legendary Mechanic, I forget the main character's name, but he's like setting up 3 years before the game world starts, right? A lot of game world VR MMOs, you get there before the world starts or your early access beta, right? Whether it's Rehack, Log Horizon, where it's like you have a setup where you are the only regressor. When you have multiple regressors, you have to go for the free for all. You have to manage all these plots, and in the essence of this one, the regressors are a plot in and of themselves because they are the main characters of their own story. It's very much like the Stanley Parable. There was a very interesting, I think it was in Bleak Walker, the novels Extra Extra. I'm pretty sure it was the novels Extra Extra on Scribble Hub, where the Stanley Parable is or it was by Mutarino, where it's like the curse of the Stanley Parable is that you will always be the main character. You will always be the world revolves around you, right? Because you are the main character, events have to happen, and then the hero has to resolve them, right? That's what we call the main character cliche, or the protagonist syndrome, right? Where you are forced into these events and have to deal with it. There's so many different categorizations. Like you have the butterfly effect affecting the main character, which has a lot to do with why does the butterfly effect strike the main character so strongly? Because the main character, the protagonist, is the butterfly flapping its wings, right? Every single time a butterfly flaps its wings, it causes a hurricane on the other side of Earth. The Earth. That's how the butterfly effect goes, right? There's chaos theory and the whole charts and whatnot. It's a meteorological weather effect, right? But because the main character is a butterfly flapping its wings and changing the future, obviously the effects are going to be felt by the main character because that's just the feedback from the world, from the changes in the world line they cause, right? So 30 years have passed since the prologue. um, it takes him 30 years to realize that he is not a supporting character, but he's a main character. Now, here's the very interesting thing. A lot of main characters, they only go through one story, right? There's only one protagonist. So there's a lot of theory crafting here. There is. I'm not gonna spoil everything, but there's a lot of regressors that come from different stories, right? Because this is a world where all stories can happen, and every hero is different. And our hero, our main character, went through like 300 web novels. He went through webtoons, he went through web novels, trying to reincarnate into one. And then the theory is he struck all 300, and that's why there's so many world lines and why this world is so chaotic. But I think it was just interesting to see so many regressors in one place in the first place, right? So a lot of the web novel, it isn't until chapter 22 there it's revealed that there are multiple regressors, right? Because our main character actually wants to kill a regressor, and one of the regressor has a cyst up. And because our main character is so overpowered, that a lot of these misunderstandings arise. And as I said, it's if you aren't aware of all these tropes and you haven't seen this before, it becomes very boring because it explains all this very easily. But if you try and see this from a high level, right, and you try and take some of this for granted, it is a very amusing story. So I will say it's very divisive. Like if you haven't read like Real Life Player, Trash of the Count's Family, if you haven't read at least five, then this is a little bit difficult to read. But for more experienced web novel readers, 30 Years of Plastic since the prologue, if you can get past the writing style, if you enjoy the author, if you can forgive the author for being a newer author, if you can get past the harem tropes, right, because you see that a lot. Some of them are much more tasteful, right? Some of them are much more personal preference, like the main heroines want to kill me. Retired War Hero, Genesis TLS, they have some great ones over there. As I said before, right, Trash of the Count's Family is a lot lighter. It's much more fun, real life player, novels extra. I've listed so many in the past before. National Master, Teacher Does Not Practice, Leader's Retirement Life, right? So you have all of these elderly protagonists. Um, Everyone else is young except for me on Wuxia World. You have a lot of these elderly protagonists, and they bring a lot of experience and maturity, right? Even have like Matsuko Renitsuke or whatever. This is like the Magic Academy, and you have a lot of these tropes. So the academy genre is so unique because one, it's a very stable plot. We know roughly know where it's going to go. There's the noble faction, there's the aristocratic faction, there's a demon lord. Um, Behind the scenes, the various politicking going on between like the empires, the demons, hidden artifacts, hidden secrets, the principal, the vice principal, the headmaster, the supporting cast, the main characters, the various princes, the various leads, female leads, male leads, and whatnot, main characters. Um, various school events. Academy is just a great place, right? From Harry Potter, Harry Potter's mentioned at the beginning, and then we get in, it really develops into its own open world story that you would see similar to like Zelda, Tears of the Kingdom, Outer Wilds. It's like a puzzle game where you suddenly you start off, everything starts off in an Academy web novel, everything starts off the same. But the ending, while ending actually expands a little bit more, there's a lot more end games than there are openings, right? Just like there are in many games. And then like the middle part, that's really the open world. And even with especially with web novels, the ending is all almost always open ended. That you have to close eventually, but or you can like keep going and then just drop the web novel. But usually that doesn't happen with contracted web novels. I really think this is so unique in its open worldness and its containedness, right? You have Simulacrum, which goes the low level. This does a more high level analysis, but it's still filled and packed with cliches, but it just runs with it. And that's what makes 30 Years Have Passed Since the Prologue so unique, right? If you read Epilogue, you read Rewrite, you read like New Game Plus, Regrets or web novel, you always have these cliches. And if you really enjoy these type of stories like Academy, Isekai, there is something for everyone. But I don't think just everyone can read this web novel. I do think this will be a very niche web novel, based on the tropes you have to enjoy, like elderly protagonists. Maybe you want just something different. But if you are looking for something different, and a little bit bored of that classic trope. I honestly, it's very hard for me to get bored of novels extra because novels extra, there's so many directions you can take it in. There's the romance direction, um, there's the munchkin direction. I think that's the Korean web novel term where it's like you slowly grow power over time over protagonist. Self-insert, right? That would be an English more fan fiction term. Whether you go the instructor route or the student route, you're resolving troubles, or being a weak protagonist, influencing world events. It's all fun, and I think Academy is very hard to do right. There's a plenty of Academy web novels that are just run of the mill. Like there's plenty of them out there. Um, but I think special unique ones obviously taken a different direction, and I think 30 Years Have Passed Since the Prologue is very unique web novel. So that's all I have to say on this particular story. I think it's really fun to read. At least it was fun to read for me. I really enjoyed it. I wouldn't recommend this to just anyone, but if you're looking for one of those academy stories, and you've read quite a lot of them, like as I said before, definitely check out The Villain Wants to Live, Real Life Player, The Novels Extra, Trash of the Count's Family, National Teacher has retired, Leader's Retirement Routine, Everyone Else is Young Except for Me. And if you find that's not enough, right, Novels Extra Extra, there's so many out there. And once you get bored of the Academy web novels, like Isaac or whatnot, which I don't think you will, but if you do, this is definitely um, it's within the spectrum, but it definitely covers a part of the spectrum not often covered. I do think it takes the essence of um, Eminence in the Shadow. It has the essence of that, like the behind the scenes, a little bit of that cringiness, but in a good way. I think Eminence in the Shadow is great in its own way because its cringiness, when you embrace that, like when you get over that cringiness and you really take it at face value for that's just a part of the work, then it's just really fun to read because that's what makes it enjoyable rather than taking this high-handed, oh, I'm better than this, and just saying, no, this is the story. And I think it makes the story even better because you consider that. Like that's like high-level reading. Then you will really enjoy 30 Years Have Passed Since the Prologue. So that's about it, and we'll stop here.